Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander. Episode 104, Seleucus IV, the Hampered. Recap number 7. In stark contrast to Antiochus III, the last one does not feel all that long ago at all. It's only been 4 episodes, counting this one, since we bid farewell to Antiochus the Worthy. Let's now gather round the campfire again to bid adieu to his son. Seleucus IV was born in about 218 BCE as the second son of Antiochus III and Laodicea III. His older brother was Antiochus the Young King, and he also had an older sister called Laodicea IV. His elder siblings were in fact married to each other, the first time this had happened in the history of the Seleucid dynasty, and their union would produce a daughter named Nyssa. Seleucus, like his possible brother Ardys, served in the war of his father against the Romans. I won't rehash this material too much, as we've been here before not that long ago. What I will say is that he took part in the attack on Pergamon against Attalus, the younger brother of King Eumenes II. He was also present at the crucial Battle of Magnesia, which saw his father defeated and Anatolia melt away like so much cheese left in a microwave for too long. That's perhaps a bit of an odd comparison to use, but hey, it's in my script, I'm sticking with it now. Seleucus' older brother predeceased their father, leaving behind no sons of his own. This meant Seleucus got an unexpected promotion, now becoming the heir to Antiochus III. He also inherited his older brother's wife, meaning his own sister, and they would have children together, who we will turn to in a moment. Seleucus was left behind in Syria when Antiochus III went east to try and take back control of the eastern provinces of the empire. These provinces had also collapsed when news of Magnesia got out. Antiochus was possibly also trying to rebuild his strength to eventually go it again with the Romans. Antiochus III leaving his son behind was a tried and tested Seleucid strategy we have seen multiple times before. However, Antiochus would not make it back west, instead dying while raiding a temple in 187 BCE. This left Seleucus as Seleucus IV, with a sister-wife Laodicea IV and 3 children, Demetrius, Laodicea and Antiochus, to complete the new royal family. Not that he would be allowed to enjoy a stable, complete royal family for very long. This is because the Roman Republic came knocking. Under the terms of the Treaty of Apamea, Seleucus' younger brother Mithridates had been taken hostage. Well, the Romans now argued that a son of the Seleucid king should still be a guarantee of good behaviour, even if the reigning Seleucid king changed. So, Seleucus IV's eldest son Demetrius, named for his famous Antigonid ancestor, was shipped off to Rome, and Mithridates travelled back east. For the rest, Seleucus' reign was marked by inactivity and fear. At one point, he almost crossed the Taurus Mountains to interfere in a conflict in Anatolia, but he eventually lost his nerve and did not break the Treaty of Apamea. His empire was also in debt to the Romans thanks to these same treaty terms, and this dominated the reign. That said, 12 years more or less fly by without us hearing anything more about them other than attempts to bring the empire out of financial woes. When we next stop to get a closer look at events, we hit a metaphorical brick wall. Seleucus IV was assassinated in 175 BCE by his minister Heliodorus, who wanted more power for himself. Edwin Bevan recounts that Heliodorus may have had the king's, quote, infant son, end quote, proclaimed as king. This would refer to Antiochus. However, as we've seen, Seleucus IV also had an elder son, Demetrius, who was currently a hostage in Rome. I'm sure this won't lead to any problems in the future. But now, on to Seleucus's epithet. I'll be honest, the reign of Seleucus IV feels like a letdown in contrast to that of his father. We may have gotten failure with Antiochus III, but at least failure means you've done something. To paraphrase a Shakespeare quote, perhaps it's better, or at least more interesting, to have fought and lost than never fought at all. Now, I know it's easy to be glorious when you're in a good starting position. Yes, Antiochus III bucks this trend and recovered from the impossible position his empire was in at the start of his reign, but perhaps it's too much to ask to see that twice in a row. There is a quote by science fiction author G. Michael Hopf which states, quote, "Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times." End quote. In theory, to adapt this quote to our current situation, Antiochus III is definitely the strong man coming from the hard time, but I don't think it's fully fair to categorize Seleucus IV as a weak man who created hard times. Rather, he started from a difficult position and just wasn't of the same caliber, or perhaps wasn't afforded the same opportunities, as his father. After all, as we've seen, his father was born into a world where Rome wasn't anywhere near as meddling anywhere as far east. That's a generalizing statement on my part, rather than exquisitely sourced analysis, but given the story of our previous 40 or so episodes, I think it stands. Do I think Seleucus IV was in an impossible position? No. An Alexander the Great, or a Napoleon, would perhaps have crossed those Taurus mountains when that war broke out in Anatolia. I've read enough and listened to enough podcasts on those two, which I will allude to in the show notes, to get the idea that these two in particular would have done so. But then again, Seleucus IV was more tied down than other rulers had been when they took the throne. That war indemnity wasn't going to pay itself. So you could say he was hampered in his efforts, hence the nickname. Next time, we are actually going to stir up some controversy. This is because we have to talk about regnal names. Without going into too many spoilers, the immediate successor of Seleucus IV usually does not get one. Even his Wikipedia page does not list a number, despite his being listed as Seleucus IV's official successor. So, I am making an executive decision right here and right now. I will be adding a regnal number. Our next ruler will not just be Antiochus, but instead Antiochus IV. And this is in contrast to other sources I've also seen and again will mention in the show notes. Does this change our overall chronology? No, it does not. However, it is going to result in all subsequent rulers called Antiochus getting bumped up by one. For example, our final of the Antiochoi, so to speak, will now be Antiochus XIV instead of Antiochus XIII. I will try to make this distinction clear as much as I can where needed. However, unlike our young kings of prior episodes, I think that this young man checks all the boxes of having had sole rule for long enough to get a number. This may cause some confusion, but you've got to be bold and audacious somewhere along the line. Just ask anyone who would have crossed the Taurus Mountains, but don't ask Seleucus IV. With that rather withering remark and assessment out of the way, we have dealt with Seleucus the Hampered, so let's turn to Antiochus IV next time. However, as with his father, don't get too attached to his glorious reign. Until then, thank you all very much for listening. Feel free to get in touch with the show's email address with any questions or comments, or indeed any alternative epithets you would have given Seleucus IV or any of our previous monarchs. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.